Hi everyone, I'm Victoria Purman. I'm really happy to be here with you tonight on Better Reading Facebook Live. Thank you, if you're watching this in the flesh, for turning away from Farmer Wants a Wife and probably Maths and, I don't know, Survivor, if that hasn't finished, I don't know. Thank you for being here with us tonight. There's a lot of competition. I'm here to talk about gotta get the right side, my new book, A Woman's Work. And it came out last Wednesday, and I've already had such brilliant feedback from people. People who read it the next day and already have told me. Now, I want to say, calm down, because it takes me a year to get the next one done. So, I just don't rush me. No pressure. This is the book up close. Isn't that a beautiful cover? I'm going to tell you tonight a little about my writing process, where the idea came from for this book, and some of the fun things I got to do when researching it. And I love research. I'm looking at your comments as we go. Hi, Christine from Ballarat. I love Ballarat. Such beautiful wide streets. That's what I remember. Hi, Bev. How you going? Christine is here. You've bought my book. Lovely cover. Thank you so much. I really love it too. Just on covers, it's always tricky to get it right. And my covers, because my books sometimes it's hard to talk about them without giving away spoilers. So if you've read the book, please no spoilers. But we didn't want to make it like a funny 1950s cover, because that's certainly not what the book's about. So I know my publisher, Joe Mackay, worked really hard with the design team at HarperCollins to get that just right. And I love the orange of the frock. And if you can see, there's a cookie tin. Oh, it's all back to front from it. There's a cookie or biscuit tin, as we should say, and there's a little head of a little boy just there. So both my characters in the book have children. So it's, you can think about who that character is, Kathleen or Ivy. Oh, hi, Janine from Melbourne. I know Janine. She used to live in Adelaide, and we first met when our boys were tiny, tiny, and now they're not so tiny, tiny. Hello, Julie from Canberra, Yvonne from Ballina, Chanel from Haywood, Marion from Lilydale, and Janet from Adelaide. She finished it Thursday night. See what I mean? Janet, you've already finished, and you absolutely loved it. I really appreciate that. Hi to Sandra. Hi to Marg Freeman, who won a copy on Better Reading and loved it. Thank you very much. And hi, Brant. You probably say Brant. We might say Brant because we were from Adelaide. How you going? And Kate Jackson says, I can't wait to read this one. Thank you for commenting there. And if you have questions about anything I talk about, please don't hesitate to put them there in the comments. I will answer them when there's a spot, or if I get to the end and we've got some time. So I was lucky enough to, where did the idea for this book come from? I was lucky enough to interview Jackie French, maybe a month or so ago, for the Rights for Women podcast. And I asked her that very question about her most recent book, Becoming Mrs. Mulberry. And she said, there's no one idea. There are hundreds of ideas which all come together when you're writing a book. And I haven't forgotten it, because I think it's so true. And this book is an example for me of where all those hundreds of ideas come together to create the story in my head, or help me create the story. And this book started with this. I'm just going to angle. I might take it out of the plastic folder. It's from It's an original 1956. So I'm a bit precious about. I don't know if you can see. See, there's a little on the black box: dried fruits, bananas, cheese, rice, eggs. This is the winning recipes from the Australian Women's Weekly 6,000 pound cooking contest in 1956. Isn't that image great on the cover? There's a farm woman there banging the pan with a wooden spoon, so everyone comes running. There's two little kids and hubby, and there's chooks and things. I just love that photo. So a really dear friend of mine, Sarah Tooth, runs two second-hand bookshops in Adelaide, and I'm always in there looking for books for research, because often the ones that are really useful to me are out of print. So I'll go in there and search the stacks. And one day I went in, and she just did this. She handed me, she handed me this booklet. And I took it from her and looked at it and said, oh my God, And she said, I know, right? And I said, that's my next book. And that's where the idea came from for this book. It was, and my book is dedicated to my friend Sarah Tooth, because without her going, I think Victoria might like that, this book wouldn't exist. So it got me thinking. So this was released, it was a special supplement to the Women's Weekly on October 31st, 1956, and the competition ran from about July, I think. And it got me thinking, £6,000 was the prize pool. So no one won the 6,000, but that's a lot of money. And so I started looking into it. To build a new house from scratch was £7,500 back in the day, back in 1956. So £6,000 was a heck of a lot of money for the magazine to be offering for readers. And so I thought, wow. And some of the prizes, like some people won £600 was the overall prize winner. £600. Some won 400, 200. I mean, an iron cost maybe £5. And I was really trying to get that in my head about how much, what was the buying power of money like that? A fridge was about £100. So if you won £600, and fridges were expensive back then compared to kind of what we would pay today. So I started thinking, who were the women who entered the contest? And what would winning some money mean to to characters that I might invent? And so that's really where the basis of the story came from. I was thinking, it was the 1950s. Not every Australian woman was a housewife, and we kind of have that idea. Many, many women worked. Either they worked outside of the home, in the traditional jobs we might think of as like retail, secretarial work. Um, um, Others worked in factories. Others took work into their homes, like washing, mending, and so on, ironing, and so on. Especially if they had young kids, because there was no childcare. So I wanted to portray those two parts of life in the 50s. So I created two characters. Kathleen is a 30-year-old mother of 5 children. She's married. We met, and she's the character in the opening scene, juggling all these 5 kids. One who's taken off his nappy and he smeared poo everywhere. Now, I did have someone say that put them off the whole book, but I thought, oh, that's just my memory of being a mum, really. Poo smeared in places that you don't want to think about. So I've opened the book with Kathleen and her 5 children, who are 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And she has a husband, Peter. And she is the kind of woman who worked for a little while, but she got married quite young and started having babies straight away. So she's what we might call the housewife character. She doesn't lie around eating chocolate bonbons, I can assure you. And then I have Ivy. And Ivy is a single mother of a 12-year-old boy called Raymond, and she works as a receptionist at a doctor's surgery. And the book is set in Melbourne, particularly around St Kilda. So there are these sort of 2 women experiencing this kind of world in different ways. And Kathleen has totally lost interest in cooking. She feels sometimes like I do, it's bulk catering. So I've got 3 sons still at home. My husband doesn't cook, but they all wash the dishes, so that's fine with me. So I do the bulk catering. Excuse my alarm. And so Kathleen's just lost interest, and her husband is not interested in new foods, and so she tries to spice things up and try some new things like rice. And he's, as some people were in the 50s, very, very suspicious of rice because of the war. And especially in sort of deference to those prisoners of war who were given a half a cup of rice a day. And it was seen as a sort of betrayal to eat Asian food. And I mean that in a generic sense, the Asian area from Japan to everywhere else. So that's her experience. But she wants to get out of the rut she's in, and her mother then suggests that they enter the contest together, and it's something they can do together. And her mum's lovely. Her mum sees that her daughter's struggling a bit. So Kathleen and her mum start cooking things, and they enter the contest. Ivy, my other character, enters the contest. She's not a cook at all. In one of these earlier scenes with her, she decides to make rice pudding and forgets to put sugar in. disgusting. But she wants to win a prize to do something for her son who doesn't have a father, and he's desperate to have a TV because he wants to watch Rin Tin Tin. And the Olympics are coming, and the way TV was introduced in 1956 was that it was introduced just in time to broadcast the Olympics from Melbourne in November. So it was a big thing. There was a big build-up. Melbourne got very excited. There were even concerns about would Melbourne be able to handle the Olympics and be on show as an international city. So that was all really fun to research too. So Ivy decides that she'll enter in the hope of winning enough money to buy a TV. Because with paying rent, she's a secretary, there's just no money and there's no support from anyone else. She's estranged from her parents who live in Sydney. So these are the setup of my two characters. But then I had to think about, how do I start the book? And that's always a question. And the answer to that came from my dear friend Kate, has a book club and a group of women she meets with regularly. And she asked me, I used to work with Kate, and she asked me along to talk to her friends about my writing and my books and so on. And the Nurses War was about to come out, and the Women's Pages was my most recent. And because it was set just post World War II, we started talking about wartime experiences of their parents and what they remembered as children. Some of them are a bit older than me, so they remembered they had parents who had served, or their fathers would serve, for instance. And a woman, Chris, told the story about her dad. Her dad was a POW for years. It was an awfully sad story. And when he came home, he was never the same. He was very, very conscious of the security of his family, so the gates on the backyard were locked and things. And so we're all pondering about what the war might have done to make him that way, and why he was so hyper-vigilant about safety and security. Well, he'd been a prisoner. But she did tell a little story that he worked in a job where he got grubby during the day. I'm not quite sure even what it was, but he would come home and the family would run the bath because he didn't waste water, or the whole family shared the bath, and he had the first bath. And then all the kids got in the bath, and then mum got in the bath last. And when I heard that story, I thought, that is how I'm going to start the book. So that is the opening chapter. Kathleen's husband, Peter, comes home. He's a car mechanic, and he comes home grubby with, greasy overalls, and he's obviously covered in oil, and he smells from petrol and other things. But he has the first bath. And by the time Kathleen gets in the bath, it's cold. It's winter when the book opens. It's cold. Probably every child in the family has peed in the bath, and she's there marinating in the bath. And I just thought it was such a symbolic way for me of showing where women came in that era, where how they were respected, and they were the last one. I mean, mums, we still do put ourselves last in some respects. And that's part of the sacrifice and the pleasure of having a family. You're not a lone wolf. You share things. But I just thought that was just such a wonderful way to get into the book. So that's why, if you've read it, that's why the book opens with that story about the bath. So we follow these two women through this experience of entering the Women's Weekly 1956 cookery contest. I'm not going to talk about what happens to both of them. And for those of you who've read it, and there are a few, hello, Carolyn. Hi, Marion. Hi, Annie, who's tucked the book away to read later. Good. Maybe in a couple of weeks. Sharon from Toowoomba, who's looking forward to reading the book. The cover is certainly eye-catching. I've previously chosen a bottle of wine because the label caught my eye. I totally agree. That's how we judge things. And Alison Shepherd has read The Land Girls, loved that insight into wartime Australia. Oh, and Janet says The Nurses War is in my top 5 all-time favourite books. Thank you so much, Janet. So that's the book. All the research I did centred around the recipes of the era, what women wore, what their pay was like. And I just really wanted to immerse myself in that era, that television was coming and the Olympics were coming. And Ivy's son Raymond says, television. Imagine having the pictures in your own living room in the corner, you know. And it's hard, it's so hard for us to imagine now how um, fascinating that would have been. I mean, the TVs were about this big, if anyone remembers, you know, this big. So everyone had to get up really close. And look at us now. I'm sitting in front of my computer, and so are all of you, or maybe your phones or tablets. And this is an image being broadcast to each other. Technology has just moved on so much. Um, and when I was researching the recipes, it really made me think that food has moved on so much as well. I did cook all the recipes that are featured in the book, much to the disgust of my family, I have to say. A couple of them were okay. One was fantastic. Cheese Dreams, if you're inclined, really, really delicious. I happen to love dates, so there are dates in that sort of sweet pastry recipe. Um, when I cook the curried beef with spaghetti, which is one of the recipes that Kathleen tries out to just spice things up in the kitchen a little bit, because she's so used to doing, you know, the sort of sausages and mash and peas and carrots on a Monday, and then lamb chops and peas and mash and carrots on a Tuesday, and then fish on Friday because of God, and then a roast on Sunday, and fall into a routine, and she's bored with it. So she introduces curry beef with spaghetti. I included the original recipe from an issue of the Women's Weekly. It was weird. For a start, I didn't use steak, but steak was probably cheaper back then. I used beef mince, but it was a weird combination of Keen's curry powder, which I have in the cupboard. There's nothing wrong with that, but sultanas and apples. So it's a very, very retro kind of curry, and I made it with spaghetti, as the recipe insisted, which was a very weird combination. We're just so used to our Italian food now and our Asian food and our curries being a certain way that it was edible. But I think with some really good extra spices in it, and maybe with some chow mein noodles, that would have been a really delicious recipe. But when I served it up and it looked kind of grey, and my husband looked at it and went, okay, well, you know, I'll have a taste. And he had a taste, and he said, he just had this look on his face. He said, this is just like the curry my mum used to make in the 70s. And it was an exotic thing then. And the sultanas and apples were there to give it a bit of sweetness rather than a really a spicy flavour. So not a big hit. Fish pie was another one, not a big hit. It was white fish, sliced tomatoes, sliced boiled eggs. The recipe called for a boiled cabbage, but I didn't boil a cabbage. I used wombok, the Chinese cabbage, and so I put that in layers in a dish. White fish in white sauce, and then some cheese on the top to grill, you know, to put under in the oven to make a bit of a cheesy toast on the top, cheesy crust. It was the blandest thing we've ever had. The only herbs and spices in it were salt and pepper. And I didn't want to overdo the salt, and I didn't want to overdo the cheese either. Oh no, it was we all had a bit in the interest of book research, and then I threw the rest away, which I hate doing that. I hate throwing food away. But anyway, this is all for research. So I'd love to know if you get to try some of the recipes in the book. But it made me think that we have Kim Bathgate says, yes, I remember my mum and Nana making the curry or sultanas even in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. And look, there was nothing wrong with it. It was just we're used to different now, I think is the issue. But back then it would have been exotic. Ange is asking, would love to get a book signed. When I do, where would that be possible? I'm going to Victoria next week. Ange, I don't know where you are. I'm doing dates in and around Melbourne, and then I'm doing dates tomorrow night at Marion here in South Australia, and then other dates around the southeast of South Australia, and then Clare and various. Look on my Facebook page. I've put all the dates up there, and I'll be continuing to update where I'm going to be. Yes, so cooking the recipes was one of the fun parts of the book. I have to say, I didn't grow up with that kind of traditional Australian or Anglo-Australian food, I have to say. I'm a first-generation Australian, as some of you might know if you've read the last of the Bonagilla Girls. And so I grew up with my mum's European cooking, sort of Hungarian, German, Austrian sort of cooking. Now, I'm not suggesting that's necessarily healthy. There's a lot of dumplings, a lot of cabbage, roast pork. And then mum started to introduce Italian foods, for example, when she lived next to an Italian in the late 60s, early 70s. So she learnt to make lasagna. So that became a staple. And she still does today, make her own pastry and make her own spaghetti. Maybe not spaghetti, she does it for lasagna. But yeah, so I remember spaghetti, I remember lasagna. I do remember in the 70s, rice riso. Does anyone remember rice riso? I was only talking with someone about that yesterday. Chicken rice riso, that was a staple. And look, I don't blame my mum at all. She worked 5 days a week. So getting something together really quickly in the evenings to feed the kids was, still tough for those of you who work 5 days a week, and those of you who aren't particularly gourmet chefs or anything, or have that real passion for it. My passion is writing books, and so that's why I do what I do. Other people might have a passion for cooking, and I'm really envious of it. I just want someone to come in and wash all the dishes. Janet West says, love chicken rice riso. I have really fond memories of it, I have to say, because it was always leftover bits of, and Annie is saying, Annie Coffee, I remember that very well. It was always bits of leftover rotisserie chicken that we would go in to make a meal the next day. So yeah, I remember rice riso. So that was the kind of fun bit of the research about the cooking. And I must say, Mum gave me, Mum is an op shop hunter like I am, and she gave me this cookbook. Oh, there's a bit of shine happening now. Just hold it that way. Women's Weekly Cookbook for All Seasons. And I was looking through this today, and it was printed in 1997. So it's like almost 25-ish years old. And we've even moved on from this era. Beef and prune casserole, Creole style pork casserole, fettuccine with lemon cream sauce, although that does still sound delicious. Tempura is in here. So there were some more modern influences, but still quite traditional. But I'm going to dig into this and cook some of the recipes, because I've still got to feed the hungry hordes. So that was part of the fun. I do put my characters, Kathleen and Ivy, through some pretty emotional things. I'm not going to talk about them because I don't want to give anything away. So it's not just about cooking. It's actually about the lives of these two women, how they end up where they are, and the expectations that were placed on them as young women, in that era, to be a certain way, to act a certain way. And I have to say, though, I do also tackle the way those society expectations of what men should do and what women should do that put us into boxes, and the effect on men of that era as well. Peter is a hard-working mechanic who feels it's his huge responsibility to go out and work as hard as he can to earn enough money to support his 5 children and his wife. And that's a pressure on him too, and that's revealed more towards the end of the book. So I'm not interested in portraying the men characters as two-dimensional cutouts either. So the men have journeys, although they're supporting characters. I do give them a journey about, and we do dig into their emotions about what they want out of life and what society expects of them as well. So that's what A Woman's Work is about. I'm really happy to answer questions. I'm just going to go through and see if there are any here. Yvonne Luckhurst says, my mother used to tell us of the sweet curry she cooked for my dad when they were first married. He said that he didn't like the fruit in it. Yeah. More fans of chicken rice riso. Ray Winter says, yep, and Deb, instant mashed potato. I've got to say, I've never used instant mashed potato, just because I couldn't, yeah. Just that was a bridge too far for me. I'm not a huge mashed potato fan, I have to say. Roast potatoes, definitely, yes. Joe White says, yes, love chicken rice riso, haven't eaten for years and years. I don't even know if you can still get it. I mean, you could kind of make your own with risoni, which is that pasta, rice-shaped pasta. But if anyone has seen rice chorizo in the supermarkets, share. Um, yeah, rice chorizo was a favourite. Hide all sorts of goodies in it. Look, that's very true, and I think that's probably why my mum did it, because I remember there being carrots and peas in it, so they were probably frozen, or frozen peas at least. And we all got our veg. Christine says, I love looking through my mum's old recipes. Oh, look, some people are lucky enough to have handwritten recipe books of their mothers or grandmothers or aunts, and they're incredible. Um, Lots of tripe, though. I am figuring out there's lots of tripe, and I mean, they especially in the post-war years, and in the war years, they used everything from an animal when it was slaughtered, and I don't criticise that at all. I think it was just being frugal. But I don't like no, I don't like tripe. I don't like liver, but I love blood sausage. Who would have thought? Christine Dudley says, I cannot wait to read a woman's work. Thank you, Christine. Out in the shops now where all good books are sold, and you can order it through Better Reading as well. Janet says, I did not see the twists coming and feel they could be stories on their own. Thank you for not saying what the twists are, Janet. I really appreciate that. Marg Freeman says, the supporting characters were really interesting and added so much to the total story. Growing up in the 50s, I could relate to so much of this tale. Oh, thank you. That's what I was aiming for, is to put these two, in a sense, ordinary women in. And ordinary, I sort of hate that word. You know what I mean when I say ordinary people or ordinary women. I think even ordinary women had extraordinary lives and made extraordinary sacrifices and went through extraordinary things. And that's what I try to do with my characters, is to look behind the cliche of what we think the 1950s was about, especially in this book. We often hear, oh, the good old days. And people still do say it, and I think they mean that with the best of intentions. But I always think, who was it good for? This book explores that. It was good for men, white men, I should say. It wasn't that great for women. There was no equal pay. There's no childcare. You couldn't get a divorce without taking 7 years, and you needed a reason for a divorce. My hair's making me itchy on my face. Yeah, so there's a lot of things about, and some of those things I do mention at the end of the book. For instance, contraception, when it was introduced in the 60s, was only to be prescribed to married women because it was family planning. So, it was about planning your family. And it was super expensive. So even a lot of married women couldn't afford it. One of the first things that Gough Whitlam did in 1972, and he ran on that platform of kind of modernising Australia, but one of the things he did in terms of birth control was his government took off the luxury sales tax on the contraceptive pill, which was about 27.5%. So that's what made it expensive. And it was listed on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, and everyone would know that makes it much more accessible and cheaper for people too. So and he did a whole lot of other things like no-fault divorce, and it's hard for those who are younger, to remember what that was like. You had to give a reason for wanting divorce: adultery, abandonment, what we would call domestic violence. I can't think what the word was then, or the expression was then, and it took a long time. And someone had to be the guilty party. No-fault divorce meant two people could just say, we don't want to be married anymore, and the divorce would be granted. So a whole lot of things have improved for women, in huge ways since I set this book. There's still a way to go, and that's what I loved exploring for these two women. Marg, I've mentioned your comment, Marg. The supporting characters were really interesting and added to the total story. Joe White says, my mum was an egg combo lover. Lol, I don't know what an egg combo is, Joe. Let me know. We're about to run out of time. I can't believe half an hour's gone so quickly. If you have a question, here we go, Janine. How long did it take to write this book, and do you have a strong plan or write as you go? It took me about 8 months, I think, and that includes taking time out to tour with with the Nurses' War, for example. and did I have a plan to write? I always know where I'm going to start and how it's going to end. And that's why, you know, I mentioned that scene with the family having the bath, the staggered bath. As soon as I knew, I'd heard that story, and I asked the woman's permission, I asked Chris's permission to use the story, and she thankfully agreed. I knew that's how it would open, and I knew the end. But it's kind of how you get from the beginning to end that I find really interesting. And I don't often plot out things. I kind of let the story reveal itself to me. And when I get to know the characters by writing them, then I can sort of pick what might happen to them or how they might react. Christine, thanks so much for your time tonight. Oh, thank you, Christine, for coming along. Kim, can you tell us about your next book? Well, here it is. Well, here's some of it anyway. Oh, I can't show you too much. I'm in the final stages of finishing it. It's due with my editor, my publisher, on June the 1st, and it'll be out this time next year. I don't have a title yet, and I'm a bit superstitious about telling you what it's about, but all I'll say is it's in the same year. I'm sticking to 1956 for this next one because I thought there was another story, really interesting story to tell about women in that year. And I can't say, I'm not going to say anything else, but it's I've stuck to 1956, which was a pivotal year in Australia at that time. And you know, the post-war era was ending, and the boomers were being born. So it's a lot of fun, and I hope you're going to love that one too. Bev says, thank you, Victoria, for interesting discussion. Thank you, Bev, and thank you everyone else for tuning in. Those of you who aren't watching tonight and who pick up and watch this video later, I know you couldn't tear yourselves away from Farmer Wants a Wife, you know, if you can. I don't watch that show, I don't. Jessica Gill, thank you so much, Victoria. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you to everyone. Thanks, Chanel. And she's going to see me in Portland. Yes, please come and say hello. I'll be in Portland May. Again, go to my Facebook author page, Victoria Purman author, and I'll put all the dates up there as we go. And Janet says, see you at Salisbury Library. Yes, see you there. And please come and say hello and that you were on the Better Reading live tonight. Thank you all. Can't wait to hear what you think about the book, A Woman's Work. It's out now on shelves where all good books are sold, and on ebook and audiobook, narrated by the incredible Jennifer Valetic. So if audiobooks are your thing, she's done all my audiobooks. I won't have anyone else. I insist on it each time. Thanks so much. Good night.